Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm CAlive, your host. So happy to be here with you. Thank you for being here with us. We do have a really good show for you as part of our whole, we're trying to be supportive and helpful in the whole praying for and working towards a Eucharistic revival here in the United States and around the world. So we've got a beautiful conversation about the beauty of the Mass, the second hour. And I hope you will join us for that. This hour, well, let's do a little bit of healing and addiction, from addiction and conversation along those lines. Maybe you're a family member, maybe that you have addiction issues in your own life. If you'd like to talk about those, we love doing these shows. They're always fruitful. They always feel like that something good happened when we have these shows, and your calls are welcome. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Our guest, as always for these shows, is our good friend Scott Weeman, who lives right here in the San Diego area and is the founder of Catholic in Recovery, which you can find at CatholicInRecovery.com. Scott, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
You look extremely bearded.
Yeah, thanks.
You got bearded since last I saw you.
Yeah, I was on a long road trip this summer. Went on a road trip, was on the road for about 70 days, put on about 10,000 miles on our SUV, brought the family with me for most of it, and had a chance to see much of the country, many Catholic in Recovery groups in different cities around the U.S., and so I grew a beard along the way.
Oh, that's great, because many people, that's their dream, is to get in an SUV with 3 children under 5 years old and just see the country with a lot of screaming and crying in the car.
Yep, it was lovely.
All right, well, tell us first of all about Catholic in Recovery, because there are people who are listening, saying, "What is that all about?" So give us the insight.
Yeah, so Catholic in Recovery. First I must introduce myself as a recovering addict and alcoholic myself, and experienced the darkness of addiction for many years, and had a chance to find new life through 12-step addiction recovery and the grace available in the Catholic Church. And so Catholic in Recovery's aim is really to blend the principles of 12-step addiction recovery with the traditions of the Catholic Church, and not so much of an organization as we are a community of men and women around the country, around the world, seeking freedom from a variety of addictions, compulsions, and unhealthy attachments. That includes alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling, pornography and lust addiction, food-related addictions, overeating or restricted eating, codependency, hoarding, all sorts of things. And I see those as different symptoms of the same spiritual malady. And we also serve families impacted by loved ones' addiction as well.
888-318-7884 is the number. Maybe you're in recovery yourself. Maybe you're hoping for recovery. Maybe, as Scott said, there's a family member you'd like to talk about. 888-318-7884. So if you say that at root it's the same spiritual malady, for one thing, that gives me a sense that even if you never have said the words "I'm an alcoholic" or "I'm a drug addict," you can be sympathetic, because we all suffer from spiritual maladies that drive us to compulsions or habits or behaviors that we wish we didn't have, and that we need God to help us overcome.
Yeah, we develop idols in our life.
Yeah. And
for an alcoholic, that idol is alcohol, and doing for us what only God can do. Food, someone who is a compulsive overeater, theirs is food, specifically flour and sugar, which has activating effects to produce compulsions and obsessions and attachments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are nuanced differences between each addiction type and the recovery for each, but whether it's a process, a behavior that we go to, a substance that we turn to, something that is not of God that we resort to in order to cope, I think certainly needs some recovery from.
Mm-hmm. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. The 12 steps started with Alcoholics Anonymous. They're used in many places now. You say a kind of blending of this Catholic spirituality with the practical help of the 12 steps. So you're not trying to replace anybody's 12-step program.
No, that's we're not here to be a substitute for Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous. There is a 12-step group, multiple 12-step groups for many different, you name the condition or the compulsion, addiction, there's a 12-step group for it. Rather, Catholic in Recovery serves to be supplemental to in many ways, I see it, we see it as a bridge between addiction recovery and the Catholic Church. Finding many people who are in the church in need of addiction recovery, perhaps they were once referred to a 12-step recovery group. They may have found some anti-Catholic sentiment within that group, or perhaps some internal factors, denial, shame, fear, gets in the way of us finding recovery in that moment. But, and so Catholic in Recovery provides a means perhaps for a second chance at the 12 steps, while also serving as a bridge back to the Catholic Church for those who have found the miracle of a recovery in a 12-step group, or perhaps even a non-Catholic Christian recovery fellowship, who feel called back to the church or to the first church for the first time. We see many people in our fellowship and in our community who are returning to the sacrament of confession for the first time in decades, or fully being baptized and received into the Catholic Church.
888-318-7884, the number. If you have questions about the Catholic perspective on healing and recovery, on the role of God's love or the sacraments in the work of healing and recovery, you're very welcome to call. Any questions? Scott's happy to take your question. 888-318-7884. And I know we've talked before about you've had a good reception from some bishops and some pastors to hosting these groups in parishes. Is that still growing? You still getting a good reception?
Yeah, increasingly so.
Okay.
Finding that, it takes some time. I think that a first response often by Catholic leaders, bishops, pastors, other church leaders can be of one of hesitancy or skepticism, perhaps, which is fair. But have been making great inroads and getting pastoral support in various places. In fact, last week or 2 weeks ago, I was in the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend, on the invitation of Bishop Rhodes to speak to all the priests of the diocese.
Really?
Yeah, and so it was a really privileged opportunity. I think it was just the bishop and his priests sharing, really preparing for his trip to Rome for the synod. But within that time, they offered half hour, 45 minutes for me to share about addiction recovery principles, Catholic in Recovery. We have 2 very active groups in that diocese and growing more. Some good things are happening. The Bishop Rhodes saw fruit in what was happening in those local groups and invited me to speak to the pastors, which is really, really important, because without pastoral support, really the support of a pastor goes a really long way. And so certainly when that comes down from the bishop, it's helpful. It was a really blessed opportunity.
Again, the number 888-318-7884. And I will tell you what usually happens is the second half of this show, it's very hard to get on with Scott because everybody is deciding right now whether to call. So an early call is more likely to get you on with Scott. But we'll do our very best to get you on with them whenever you call, 888-318-7884. We're talking about addiction, recovery, healing. We're talking about the role of the Catholic faith in all of that, and about Scott's ministry, born in recent years, born out of his own experience, Catholic in Recovery. You can find it at catholicinrecovery.com, where they have a workbook now.
Yes. Published almost a year ago, the Catholic in Recovery workbook. Yeah. And that was long overdue, and we find hundreds of people currently working through the Catholic in Recovery workbook, which integrates Catholic spirituality, sacraments, wisdom from saints into the working of the 12 steps. So 20 sections, and really provides a guide to be used with a sponsor, small workbook group, but integrates Catholic sacraments into the working of the 12 steps, and has been really helpful. Something that is tangible, that can be, oftentimes we hear, how do I integrate the sacraments into my recovery? That's what I'm here for, and this provides a very tangible way.
Again, CatholicinRecovery.com. We'll talk with Scott about the online meetings that are available to both family of folks dealing with addiction and also those who are dealing with their own addiction and recovery. We'll talk about how you can start these groups, because they're growing all over the world. But if you have a particular question about a family situation, a personal situation, you are very welcome to call 888-318-7884. Right back with more with Scott Weeman on Catholic in Recovery right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment. Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Hi, this is Doug Keck on Mother Angelica Answering the Call. Father Joseph, Mary, and I mind decades of phone calls answered by Mother Angelica. Join us Sunday for a half hour of teaching, advice, laughter, and plenty of prayers from the one and only Mother Angelica.
Mother Angelica Answering the Call, Sunday afternoon, 2 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Catholic Answers Live. Scott Weeman, our guest, the founder of Catholic in Recovery, an apostolate, a ministry of recovery in the Catholic Church that we at Catholic Answers have just been cheering on for years. And its growth is a very good sign for lots of healthy, good things in the Catholic Church. If you'd like to talk to Scott about addiction and recovery, 888-318-7884. I'm about to go to the phones, but before that, I got to read what Carrie told me to read. Get on over to shop.catholic.com and take advantage of our Shield Week sale. Just look for the Shield Week category, more than 500 items on sale. And remember, the promo code St. Michael, ST Michael, will save you 30%. Don't miss out on what can only be called a heavenly savings opportunity. Yes, Carrie made me say that last line. That is some advertising writing. 888-318-7884 is the number. Anything you want to cover before we go to the phones, or shall we go to the phones?
Let's take calls.
All right, let's start with John in Atlanta, listening on the Quest. Love the Quest. Big Catholic radio station in Atlanta. John, you're very welcome here. Go ahead with your question for Scott.
Doing great, John. Yep.
Linton with you here in Atlanta at Christ the King about, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago. He's a true gift. So I just thought I'd let
Scott?
Give Father Emmerich Fought a plug.
Well, generally we don't do all those plugs and everything, but you picked the right guy. I wasn't going to interrupt you. So, Scott, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I'm a fan as well, John. I appreciate the work that Father Emmerich Vaught does. He primarily travels the country, does parish missions. Like you said, you got to experience a 3-day series with him in your hometown. I'll echo that. If Father Emmerich Vaughn is coming through town and speaking to your parish, make it a point to go see him. He speaks with a lot of passion and hope, and I would say joy around addiction recovery. And I am a recipient of his quarterly newsletter, the 12-Step Review. So I'll second that as well.
John, thank you very, very much. Appreciate that. 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. Going to Deborah now in Pennsylvania, watching on Facebook. Deborah, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
Having me. I was calling in to tell you that real quick, because I can go on a rant, that I had an alcohol and sex addiction, and it was pretty bad. And I'm a Christian, and I was a Christian at the time that I was doing this. And so I got a lot of rhetoric for that, but maybe I did take advantage of the Lord and His grace. I'm guilty of that. But I've done a lot of things, sir, that I shouldn't have done. And so anyway, I started getting these visions and dreams. And these dreams were so profound that I couldn't refute them. I knew that the Lord was trying to convey something to me to make a change.
Mm.
And I don't know if you want to hear all that because it's kind of lengthy, so I'm not going to get into that. But I just know that.
I was just going to ask you. What I would like to know is, did it work? Did it have an effect on you?
Oh boy, I dreamt one night that I found myself above the earth in the clouds, and they were beautiful, and the sky was so blue, and it was so real, so surreal. I think it was out of the body, so I think it was a vision. Because visions are different than dreams, in my opinion. Visions, they are seared in your mind, and when you wake up, you remember them verbatim. But dreams, if you don't write them down right away, you'll lose them. So
okay.
I dreamt that I was,
Go ahead. I was going to help you continue, but you're continuing. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's fine. No, that's fine. And so I saw this door, and it was a door that was half glass and half solid. So I said, and I walked over to it. And through the glass, I'm standing there, and I see Christ, and He's in the clouds, and He's not making any contact with me. He's not even looking at me. And when I see Him, He was so beautiful, but His head was down, and He had this beautiful, dark, reddish, he looked Semitic, and these beautiful cheeks and his beard and his white robe. Oh, he was so beautiful, majestic. But he wouldn't look at me. And when I saw him, I wanted to get to him. Well, I'm banging on the door to get in. He would not even look up at me. He completely ignored me. So I woke up, and I knew. I told a friend of mine who's a Christian, and she said, Deb, He's trying to tell you that if you don't change your ways, I'm not exonerated. Anybody can lose their salvation if they continue in sin.
Did this lead to your recovery, Deborah?
Oh, yeah. Slowly. I want to be honest with you. Honest.
If you can just hang on a quick second, I want to ask Scott about that slowly. Is that common in recovery, not just fall off the horse and be suddenly recovered? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for sharing, Deborah. It's beautiful. And, the 12 steps move us toward a spiritual awakening. And much experience tells us that awakening happens very differently. This seems to be a blend of kind of a white light experience mixed with a progressive awakening. As the recovery literature would say, of the educational variety. And so, yes, perhaps speaking of relapse is not part of everyone's story, but it is part of many a story. For those who seek recovery, seek a new way of life, are trying one day at a time to remain sober, free, abstinent, clean, balanced, and may fall off of, may not be cooperating with God's grace on that day. This so much that Deborah shared. One, she noted kind of a dual addiction, alcoholism or drug addiction, and sexual addiction, alcoholism and sexual addiction. So this is I think it's really important to highlight and point out that oftentimes in the church we posit lust addiction, pornography, or sexual addiction as a men's issue. Not the case. Let's be reminded that addiction does not discriminate based on gender lines, class lines, socioeconomic lines, racial lines, vocational lines. There is much needed help and support for both men and women from all different types of addictions, including lust and pornography, sexual addiction.
Praise God for that.
Absolutely. We just actually started a Sunday night group for women, a women's only group for lust, pornography, and love addiction. So anyone who is similarly or still struggling with that, you're not alone and help is available. Now, back to the white light falling off the horse, getting back on, that, it all points to an opportunity to cooperate with God's grace, whether it's, revealed through a vision, revealed through inspiration, however we might find it. Acting upon that is our responsibility.
Oh, yes. Deborah, all that makes sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. But the thing about it is, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but maybe I kind of am, growing up with no father because my dad died when I was 6 with a brain tumor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah.
And then my sister got killed a year later. And I'm originally from Long Island, and the commuter train, the Long Island commuter train, they were playing chicken. Her and this boy, they died. And my mother lost her life that day.
Deborah,
she was 13.
That is monumental suffering for a child. I'm very sorry that you ever went through that. It does not sound to me, and I'm not an expert like Scott is, so I'm going to ask him. That doesn't sound to me like making excuses, but is there a distinction to be made between making excuses and just acknowledging there could be a cause for this in me?
Absolutely. I think that there is value in recognizing what is at the root of our troubles, and there is also that sometimes that can distract us from being rooted in the solution. And so it's the Catholic both and. We must be, here's an analogy that's often used. If your house is on fire and burning down, are you asking how it started, or are you trying to put it out? First, we try to put out the fire, and then we ask the questions of how did this get started, what could have been causes, how do we avoid this in the future? Now, that's all done with awareness of, that can all be done while we're putting the fire out, and the 12 steps provide a really practical human blend between, 100% surrender to God and recognizing that no human power can relieve us of our addictions,
right,
and also taking responsibility for what we can do today. This requires certainly connection with others, individual relationships with others who have walked the path in front of us, and also a relationship with a community. A recovery fellowship and a church community, I think, are vital to that process because it requires, particularly with someone who is so overcome by patterns of addiction, doing something new is really, really hard and is acting against all of our biological,
right,
emotional, cognitive, and spiritual tendencies.
Yeah.
And so we must give great credence to developing new patterns, taking on new spiritual tools and putting them in place, but we certainly can't do that alone.
Deborah, I'm so grateful for your call, and this is one of the things that I always like when you're on, and this makes me think we need this in the heart of the church, is that one of the things we Christians, Catholics maybe in particular, are not always good at is telling other people what the Lord has done for us. And it's like when I hear Deborah talk, I think, the Lord did that for me. Not the exact same thing, but in a certain way, yeah, exactly the exact same thing. He did for me just what he did for her.
Yeah, and when she was sharing that story, what I was thinking to myself is, if I look through that glass mirror, is Jesus looking back up to me, or is there something in my life that I need to do to change that? And yeah, so I totally agree. Storytelling, sharing testimony, sharing the gospel, the good news, is really an important part of discipleship, evangelization. Yeah, exactly.
Deborah, thank you for the call. If you'd like, I'd like to send you a book we have called Secrets from Heaven, Hidden Treasures of Faith in the Parables and Conversations of Jesus from our friend Father Sebastian Walsh. All you have to do is give us an address and we will mail it to you. You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you'd like to, we will send it to you. Thank you, Deborah, for that call. I'm going to go now to Mary in Cleveland, Ohio, listening on AM 1260 The Rock. Mary, we're awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your comment or question for Scott.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well, yes.
I just wanted to say I think this is so fantastic, and I'm really excited. I was going to put on a book on tape, and I happened to turn the station on, and it was having you guys on right now. And I just wanted to say that I've been sober for 4 years. I'm in Cleveland. Cleveland has a really well-established AA community, being so close to Akron, which is where AA was founded. And one thing that I find a lot in meetings is it's so heartbreaking because there's so many people that have been so injured by the Catholic Church. And I've never really, since I was a child, I've had such a great faith. But when I'm at meetings, sometimes I have a disconnect between my Catholic faith and my higher power. I know it's the same God, but in AA, it's like I'm disconnected a little from my faith because there's a lot of hostility towards it. So just wanted to say I'm really excited about hearing about this workbook, and I'm going to get it and look into it and hopefully gain some insights that I can share with others. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, I would suggest, try a Catholic in Recovery virtual meeting sometime. We have 50 weekly virtual meetings that gather every day of the week, various types of meetings. So if you'd like to experience, certainly continue to participate in your 12-step recovery groups as you are. But if you're interested in just, exploring or participating in a meeting, a recovery meeting where you are allowed to be authentically Catholic, check out CatholicInRecovery.com, and a host of virtual meetings will be available to you.
You can hear we have to take a break, Mary. If you'd like a copy of Secrets from Heaven, I'd like to give you a copy of that book as well. Just hang on the line and we'll send it to you. Scott Weeman is our guest, the founder of Catholic in Recovery. And your resource for the next half hour, 888-318-7884. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Is relativism dead? It sure seems dead. Each day, new moral demands are made, and they are presented to us as absolutes. Everything, from transgender ideology to physician-assisted suicide, is presented as a moral good that all right-thinking people must accept. But Catholic Answers' own Carlo Broussard says look deeper, and you will see today's moralism is just relativism dressed up in new clothes. Carlo's eye-opening book, The New Relativism, shines a light on how the sacred moral teachings of this age cover up a deep denial of moral truth. Order your copy of The New Relativism today at shop.catholic.com and be prepared to defend the truth against aggressive relativism. The New Relativism at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. We bring you the truth of the Catholic faith on Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Scott Weeman is here. And usually at this point in the show, I say to Scott, why don't you have a podcast, Scott? This is so good. We need more of this. So that could be possibly in the works.
Maybe.
All right, that's as much as we're saying now, I guess. Maybe. Thank you, Mary, for the call. Anybody's welcome to call if you'd like to talk about being in recovery, Catholic in recovery.
Yeah, I just want to make a note about the opportunity that radio provides on this topic, because most of your listeners, or many listeners, probably like listening by themselves in a place where they can hear a message. I have the opportunity oftentimes to go in front of churches after Mass, give pulpit announcements afterwards, tell about Catholic in Recovery. We have resources available. Come see me afterwards if you want to. I've learned that no one really wants to be seen talking to the addiction guy after Mass, which is a reflection on a need for cultural change within our church.
Sure.
But this medium provides an opportunity for those who are listening, perhaps, in a place of I can't be going on with my life this way, right? Why I continue to fall down the same trap every single day, or, on a very regular basis. How is there ever any hope for me? And I just want to note that if you are that person listening today, or you are struggling with a loved one's, a family member's addiction, a spouse, a child's, a parent's, a siblings, you may be in a place of hopelessness, and know that you're not alone and that God can work miracles for you and for your loved ones. Hang on. Hope is something that we don't give a lot of credence to oftentimes because it's not so tangible. We can't measure it so well, but hope is a really important part of all of this. Any kind of healing, growth, faith requires some hope. I heard a gentleman today who spent this morning, I take a Catholic in Recovery meeting to a place called Rise Up Industries, just down the road from the studio here.
Oh, yeah.
Men who were formerly incarcerated, many serving life sentences. Heard a guy with who spent 21 years in prison, just got out about 9 months ago, talk about exercising the hope muscle. And I think that that's a really important exercise for us to be considering during our day. What can I do to exercise a hope muscle that looks faithfully and with hope towards my life? Because too oftentimes we who are impacted by addiction are living in darkness. And so just allow that hope to flicker as it can.
Well, praise God. Thank you, Scott. Thank you very, very much. CatholicInRecovery.com is where you can go if you would like more information, if you think, because you can do that in private as well. Kevin's in Akron, Ohio, listening on Living Bread Radio. Kevin, welcome. Go ahead with your question for our guest, Scott Weeman.
Thank you, Cy.
Sure.
Thank you, Cy. And Scott, continued success with your program and your ministry.
Thank you.
So mine's a little more mundane question. Somebody recently told me that Alcoholics Anonymous only has a success rate in the 20% range. And my first question is that an accurate statement? And then secondly, does Catholics in Recovery have any statistics on your success rate?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, to my understanding, Alcoholics Anonymous has not maintained or kept any kind of statistics around success rates. These things are very difficult to measure, largely because of the anonymous nature of meetings like that. And additionally, there are also, various, especially over the last, I would say, 30 years or so, you have people who are there because they are court appointed or, maybe not there on their own free will entirely. So hard to really get an understanding of what does success look like. I think that the greatest success can be seen anecdotally in the change that takes place among individuals who turn their life over to God through 12-step recovery groups. And similarly, Catholic in Recovery, because of the anonymity and the importance really given to confidentiality, privacy, and keeping membership anonymous, makes it very difficult to keep any kind of data. We do our best, and we do survey people to ask for experience and such. A lot of that, though, is really requires self-reporting, and so we have a lot of anecdotal and qualitative data, but less so quantitative data.
Okay, well, appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Kevin.
I wonder though, how do we measure success in the church?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. How successful is Mass? How many times do you have to go to Mass and confession before you're a saint? Do you walk out the first time?
Yeah.
Saint? I don't know.
Yeah, it's I think that success here is and I know what it means. Success means you're either sober or you're not sober. But there is so much of, how do you measure spiritual success in many ways?
Right. It's a very fair question, though,
so.
Kevin, and we're glad you called. Every line full, so I have that urgency in my voice a little bit. Just got to keep moving. Rick's in South Dakota, listening on 90.1 FM. Rick, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
Hi there. My name is Rick Wakeman, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Rick.
I've been sober since March 30th, 1975. And if I can live another year and 4 or 5 months, I'll have a 50-year chip. My one goal in life. Anyway, I go to daily Mass. I have the precious blood in the Eucharist every day. And in addition to that, I am arthritic from hell. And I have a lot of prescription powerful pain relievers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm open with my confessor, my sponsor, my wife, and selected members in my AA club. I want you to give me an idea of whether I should, in a meeting, offer the fact that I am sober and I'm not using alcohol, but I am using pain relievers in a big way, pretty much.
Okay.
But I want to know what you think about that.
All right, Scott?
If I should mention that my conscience is clear, but I am concerned about other people, and if I'm asking to cause more trouble for people instead of helping.
Okay, Rick, thank you.
First of all, Rick, thank you for calling. Praise God for such a lengthy sobriety and God's grace being abundant throughout that. I have no doubt that you have met the Lord and know the Lord in a very intimate way. It also sounds like you have a great, what I'll call board of spiritual directors, a personal board of spiritual directors around you, a sponsor, confessor, people who are, part of your recovery community who can speak truth to you, maybe when you might be a little confused. And, listen to this, even at 49 years sober, still seeking counsel from people and resorting to a sponsor and people,
Yes.
That's a great deal of humility. And I think even asking the question, is my prescription drug use does that disqualify me from sobriety, is kind of the essence of what I'm hearing in the question. I'm not going to make that call here on the radio. I believe that, certainly I know that people who are prescribed medication and given a prescription to take at certain amounts, certain doses at certain times, and do so per the recommendation of their doctor, will be okay. However, that can be a great temptation to people. Opioids are very powerful and can ignite or activate that pleasure center. That is same pleasure center that's hit when alcohol reaches the body and things like that. So we want to be very careful. We want to be certainly honest with our doctors. Whether you have alcoholism or drug addiction or food-related addiction, or really, I would be very honest about your addiction, your mental health, which includes your addiction challenges and recovery with your doctor, so that he can be understanding of or maybe consider other options that wouldn't require some kind of opioid use. But yeah, if your conscience is fine, I think that is the most important. If the people with whom you're consulting with, that you have respect for, I would certainly seek their counsel before mine.
Rick, I feel very grateful for your call, and what a beautiful story. And if you'd like a copy, I don't know why I'm giving away Secrets from Heaven today, but I started and now I can't stop myself. So I'm going to give it to you. If you'd like it, just hang on the phone, give Edgar your address, and we'll send you a copy of Secrets from Heaven.
Mm-hmm. He mentions 49 years of sobriety, next year 50 years. I got to give a shout out to a woman today in our community, Marie B., who celebrates 50 years of continuous sobriety today. Today is her sobriety birthday or anniversary.
Congratulations, Marie.
So just wanted to shout that out. And 50 years of uninterrupted reality.
Isn't that what a great way to say it? Rick, again, thank you very much. If I'm going quick, it's just because I'd like to get everybody on. David is in Lubbock, Texas, listening on 101.3 FM. David, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Scott.
I have a question about marijuana. I have a grandson that is using marijuana pretty heavy. Is it a step-up drug? By that I mean, will he eventually want a stronger illicit drug to get the same feeling that he did with marijuana?
That's a good question, David. It sounds like a very concerning question. So I would just say that marijuana, we often think of it as non-addictive. It's legal in a lot of states now. That is, I used to smoke non-addictive marijuana multiple times a day, and I couldn't stop.
That's an extraordinary thing. Not addictive, but you couldn't stop.
Yeah. Now, similarly, though, some people can use marijuana, like some people can use alcohol in a social environment. I'm not condoning that use at all. I'm not condoning any kind of recreational or social behavior, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to other harder drugs or more illicit drugs. I certainly understand how fear can take us down the road of, kind of projecting that, and we certainly want to be aware of consequences that can come, while also, maybe giving a break. I would, really have an open conversation about it with, anyone that you're concerned with, and also similarly make sure that the family is on the same page. Addiction oftentimes certainly doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I'm not saying that social or recreational marijuana use is this is an addictive or an addiction situation, but just being mindful that addiction can really permeate through the entire family, oftentimes creates division. Different people have different plans. How involved should we? We should be very involved. We should be given some space. Really important that we stay unified as a family while any of this develops.
And I'm going to leave it there, David. Your question is one that many, many people have these days, so I thank you for the call. And if you'd like a copy of Secrets from Heaven, Hidden Treasures of Faith in the Parables and Conversations of Jesus, I'll send that to you as well. I'm like Oprah today, just giving stuff away. We'll take a quick break, be right back with more conversation with Scott Weeman, the founder of Catholic in Recovery, right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, we'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
By providing quality programming faithful to the teachings of the Catholic Church, EWTN Television is TV that viewers can trust. Whether it's films, documentaries, news coverage, lively discussion shows, or kids programs, we highlight the truth that is the eternal Word. For a complete schedule of EWTN television programs, visit EWTN.com and click TV. EWTN is the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm CAlive, your host. Scott Weeman is our guest. Scott is the founder of Catholic in Recovery. You can get the Catholic in Recovery workbook. You can find out all about what they do at CatholicInRecovery.com. Maybe you want to start a group where you are. Maybe you want to find out where there's a group near you, or maybe you want to join one of the internet meetings that they have. Whatever is the case, I hope that you will. Go to CatholicInRecovery.com. We always like it when Scott's here because we get to have profound conversations about the faith with people that we don't otherwise get to have. And I'm just going to keep moving, Scott, if you don't mind, because there's others who want to talk with you. Alicia is in Texas, listening on 1430 a.m. Alicia, we're awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Scott.
Hello, Scott. Thank you for taking my call. I have a friend who she's in denial. She's a victim of all the circumstances that she has gotten herself in. She considers herself a devout Catholic, so she is always talking or trying to convert others to Christ. But when she drinks, and it doesn't all happen all the time, but sometimes when she drinks, it's like she lets the devil in, and she starts cursing and telling everybody how they need to follow God, and she's, it sounds like it is a hypocritical type situation, and most people are very turned off, and it's just a very difficult situation. And then afterwards, her feeling is, well, you should have protected me. Again, she's the victim. She's always the victim of any and every situation. And she doesn't admit that she has a problem. And this, her marriage ended in part because of her drinking. Again, not
Are you looking for Scott to give you some ideas on how to be helpful to her?
How to help her.
I gotcha.
Yes,
Okay.
how to help her, because I don't know what to do, and again, her husband left her because of it.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, I'm conflicted on whether to dive into problem solving or to have a philosophical discussion around what we can do to help our family members and friends, loved ones who struggle with addiction. Alicia, what have you tried? I mean, have you had a conversation with your friend?
I have, and I offered to, she's to talk to. I said, well, let's talk to the priest, but I want to be there to give the full description of what I'm seeing, because I think she goes to confession like 5 times a week, but I kind of feel like she forgets, again, she's the victim, so she doesn't give the same account that maybe the rest of us see when we're with her. And she of course, she doesn't want to do that. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I hear you. So I'm thinking back a few weeks ago, our scripture reading, Sunday gospel reading, was Jesus instructing people how to offer fraternal correction. How do we provide support when someone is misbehaving? What are we called to do? He gives 4 steps. He says, first, speak to them directly, individually. If that doesn't have an impact, then bring along another person and speak with them. Maybe that's more than one person. Maybe it's a group of people, a small group of people that are coming in with love and concern, not to build a case, but really just for the good of the other. If that doesn't work, then tell the church. Now, that's can be interpreted a variety of ways, but largely what that means is kind of bring it to, you said bring it to your priest. That's not a bad representation of the church, but you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, and this is a situation where, I would suggest stepping away from the propensity to build a case. I fall into this oftentimes. You want justice. You have a human and I think a God-given desire for justice to be served here in some ways. And maybe a blend of justice and mercy is certainly necessary. So, the third thing Jesus says is bring the church, is take them to the church. And then the fourth thing is treat them as you would a Gentile, I think. Basically, which means create some healthy boundaries in the relationship, treat them with love and respect and dignity, recognize their human dignity, but perhaps then you might need to put some of your own personal boundaries and, recognize that the one person that you can change is yourself, needing God's grace to do that. How does that land, Alicia?
Certainly sounds like what I need to do.
Okay.
Because I did put some boundaries and said, we need to just kind of, I can't, I need a little time to digest this, and you need to, we need to have some boundaries, because I think she was just, again, I want to help, but I also have to, she needs to realize that it's, I think she needs to kind of see it for herself. And so now she's been calling me, like I had to block her, which I've never done before, but she calls me all the time, all hours of the night, telling me she loves me, and I need to forgive her. And it's like, don't do this. Don't do this. You need to give yourself time. You need to heal.
Scott?
I'll suggest spending time with the Serenity Prayer yourself. Mm-hmm. All of us, individuals impacted by addiction, loved ones, family members, friends of addicts, people that have addiction in their lives. The Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's a longer Christian version that you can find as well, but simply that, repeated on a regular basis, I think will help to provide insight in how you might be helpful and recognize your limits in this situation.
Alicia, thank you. God bless you. I appreciate that. I'm going quick again because I want to try to get everybody on that I can with Scott Weeman. So over to Dallas, Texas we go. Listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network is Maria in Dallas, Texas. Maria, we're grateful for the call. Go ahead with your question for Scott.
Hi, yes. So we're dealing with my daughter who has an addiction. But before that started, she pretty much disconnected from the church. And I think that didn't help. So how do we help her heal when she's opposed to religion, to the faith, even though she's been raised Catholic, especially when the program itself includes that spiritual aspect? So we go to the group for families, and we learn how important it is for the healing to be complete, to include the spiritual side. So when she's reluctant to this area, how do we help her with her healing?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maria, for calling and sharing. And you're not alone. And there are probably a bunch of callers out there who are in a similar place. You know, the principles that we might employ to help our loved ones, particularly our kids, to get back to the faith, oftentimes very similar to what's necessary, kind of an attitude and a behavior that's necessary to help our loved ones find sobriety. And so similarly, the principles are the same. Living a life of faith that is attractive and joyful yourself will certainly help with that. I also want to note, there's about, we've got 8 minutes left in this hour or so. In 8 minutes, we have a Catholic in Recovery Family and Friends virtual meeting that will begin. And actually today we're going to be doing a webinar where you'll hear from people who have found peace amidst family addiction. So I don't want to divert any Catholic Answers Live listeners, but if there is an immediate need and a dire immediate need, we have help for you in about starting in about 7 minutes. Go to CatholicInRecovery.com. However, still here, I think that participating in a recovery fellowship yourself, where you can learn the important principles of really just like the last caller, limits of what can I change, what can I not change. It sounds like you're doing the right thing.
Man, I want to really second that, and I hope you will do it, Maria, because I do think there's a kind of resistance that we have sometimes. In my own experience in my own life, I have had the experience of, do I need this training, this help, and it's so helpful to learn from what a million other people have gone through, and learn that you can set these boundaries, and you can maybe not grow comfortable with, but at least acknowledge there's limits to what you can do.
Mm-hmm. My story is that my loved ones, my parents, my friends, my siblings and others desperately wanted something different for me when I was active in my addiction. And
Right.
were probably saying a lot of the same things that the people who spoke to me when I found recovery were saying to me. But first, I wasn't in a place of hearing it. I was defensive. I was in denial. All of that was a threat to what was my idol at the time. It was the thing that was most important to me, my alcohol and drug use. And so it wasn't until in a 12-step recovery meeting where a man darted across the room, looked me in the eye, and said, "I know exactly how you feel. You don't ever have to drink again." This was a moment of grace that was met by someone who was willing to share their experience, strength, and hope, recognize their dark past as a great asset to help me in that moment. That seemed to cut through my denial and shame and open the door for hope.
Amen. Marie, so if someone is listening right now, say a parent's listening and saying, I have not known what to do with my child's addiction, or a spouse is listening, haven't known what to do, they just go to Catholic in Recovery in 5 minutes from now.
You can go now.
And a meeting starts.
Yep, go now.
And you can be anonymous there, or you got to...
You can be anonymous under events. There's you'll see an events tab. You can find an upcoming webinar, register for that. You'll be immediately sent an email with the sign-in link. Or go to our meetings tab, select virtual meetings, and find the family and friends meeting that starts at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time. And you can join through that link.
Maria, thank you very, very much for the call. I hope that was helpful to you. I know that you helped many people by asking that question. Scott Weeman has been our guest. Scott, the book, the Seven Sacraments, the Sacraments and the 12 Steps.
The 12 Steps and the Sacraments.
All right, I was so close to getting it. The 12 Steps and the Sacraments. CatholicInRecovery.com is where you can learn all about what Scott and others are doing to help people in recovery. I hope you will check it out. And also possible future podcaster, Scott Weeman, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Si.
Man, I love it when you come here. I really love these shows. God is so good and so full of healing and the power of healing. CatholicInRecovery.com. When we come back, we're going to talk about the beauty of the Mass with Father Michael Rennier. I never know how to pronounce it. Right back. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm CAlive, your host. For the most part, we experience the Eucharistic Lord, Christ our Lord, given to us in the context of the Mass. That's where we celebrate that. So I'm thinking if we're going to have a Eucharistic revival, we're going to have to take seriously what we do at Mass and make sure that what we're doing at Mass is actually bringing us closer to Him, because that's what we want a Eucharistic revival to be. If we're going to revive something, let's revive coming close to Jesus, who comes close to us in the Eucharist. And so this hour we talk a bit about the beauty of the Mass. And is the Mass beautiful? Is the Mass intended to be beautiful? What does it mean that the Mass is beautiful? And can we make the Mass more beautiful? Father Michael Rennier is our guest. He's the former Anglican church pastor from the Anglican Church in North America. He was received into the Catholic Church 13 years ago in 2010 and ordained under the pastoral provision for former Anglican clergy. He now serves in the Archdiocese of St. Louis, where he and his wife live with their 6 children. Father Rennier, thank you very much for being here with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
In addition, I should tell people you also have a book called The Forgotten Language, How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. And you also write at Aletheia, Alicia?
Aletheia.
Yeah, Aletheia, okay.
I have a Sunday column there. So once a week on Sunday, I have a lifestyle piece. I usually write about kids and how I'm a bad parent, that sort of thing.
No, that's some of what you write about, but there's all kinds of interesting things there. And you've also written about some liturgical things there as well. So the forgotten language, what is that? Latin? Is that Greek? What are you talking about? The forgotten language?
That's funny. People always ask. They say, "Are you talking about Latin, Father?"
Yeah.
And I say, "That's not what I'm talking about." So I'm actually talking about this language that's called poetics. Which is related to poetry, but it doesn't mean that we're talking about the Mass needs to be literally poetry and rhyme and be in a Shakespearean sonnet. But poetics is a language that is really concerned with transcendence. So it's concerned with beauty and the connection of everyday things, our daily lives, to transcendent beauty and eternal meaning. So the poetics of the Mass, or trying to understand the poetics of the Mass, is trying to understand, well, what is this deep symbolic set of language? The things, not just what we're saying, but what we're smelling. Why are we smelling that certain fragrance of incense? And why does the priest dress that way? And why do we ring bells? And why are the altar servers dressed that way? This whole language of symbols, which can be very frustrating for us, because they're very difficult to interpret. And so it's not an everyday, prosaic language or a functional language. It's a language of mystery.
Well, is it frustrating in part because we've become maybe an overly practical people that since the Industrial Revolution, certainly, there's a certain kind of pragmatism and demand for what's the value of that? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Is that part of why we lost the language of the poetic language of the Mass?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I talk about that in my book a little bit, which was my development from being a Protestant, who my attitude towards going to church on Sunday was, what am I getting out of it? How did the homily help me be a better person? What self-help angle is there here? Where did I feel close to Jesus? Right? Did I get that emotional reaction I was wanting? And I was searching basically for the fulfillment of my needs. And when we approach worship that way, yeah, you're absolutely right. Then we're looking for, well, I need it to be relevant, and I need the music to be very easy for me to understand, and I need the homily to get me excited about something, or have a self-help angle, because it's all about practicality. And when we collapse the Mass, the language of the Mass, down to that very shallow level, we lose really the heart of it, which is the Eucharistic mystery.
It's interesting when you talk about needs, even the this is a development of modern psychology to talk about my needs. People didn't go around talking about their need. I can't remember who's the psychologist or psychiatrist who came up with that, the needs-based theory of
the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy.
Maslow, yeah. Right. We all talk like Maslow now. So now if I don't get all my Maslowian needs met at Mass, the Mass is not effective or something. But I guess in a certain way, if that's the language we speak, can we even learn another language? Can we go back to a poetic language, or has all that been ruined for us?
Well, it's difficult because it's very jarring. So
yeah.
I distinctly remember going to a Catholic Mass. I was probably about 20 or 21 years old. I was this very arrogant theology student at a place called Oral Roberts University, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I wanted to be a Pentecostal pastor, so I was studying theology. But the Catholic Church always really intrigued me, right? Mm-hmm. So I had that typical attitude where I was very prejudiced, and I just knew Catholics were idol worshipers and all these other things that are so incorrect about the church. But at the same time, it was like the hook had been set. And I couldn't escape, right? I didn't really want to be interested in the Catholic Church, but I was. And so I went to, it was Holy Family Cathedral in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I saw the Mass, and I thought it was very beautiful in part, because I had never encountered anything like it. I could see right away it was very peaceful. It was very reverent. It was very contemplative. But also, I found it confusing, partly boring, right? I didn't understand what was happening, so I felt defensive.
Yeah.
Because, and looking back on it now, what was happening to me was that I was going to this Mass unprepared because my desires were misformed, misshaped. So the way up until that point that I had desired God was wrong. I was desiring him for what I thought he could give me.
Yes.
Or being a particularly arrogant man, I wanted to be the smartest one in the room. So what I desired was theological knowledge, like a lecture type of knowledge. And the Mass doesn't give us that. The Mass is something else entirely. And so because my desires were misformed, and my soul was shaped wrong, I wasn't ready to receive the beauty that the Mass was offering. Because beauty, it's a very difficult language. It requires sacrifice and love, right? So we say Jesus Christ, it's the most beautiful thing. He died on the cross for us. Well, to an outside observer, it was hideously ugly. It was violent. He was beaten to a pulp. And yet here we are as Catholics saying it's beautiful. Why? Because we're seeing the interior love. We're seeing the soul shining through. But if you're not prepared to see that, then you miss it.
No, you can almost imagine the modern Catholic standing at the foot of the cross going, I didn't get anything out of this crucifixion. It really didn't meet my needs.
Right.
Yeah, because, so let me put it in very concrete terms, however, because there are very many well-meaning and good Christian people and genuinely deeply Christian people who really, really want the Mass to be more like a Protestant praise and worship service. And they really think we're missing the boat with all this old music and all the bells and the smells and all of that. So how might you explain to someone that the Mass is actually doing something different than is being done at a Protestant praise and worship service?
Yeah, the only thing I really fall back on is my own experience of what it was like to go to a Protestant worship experience and how difficult it was for me, in that I was trying desperately to connect with Christ and to have some sort of stable spiritual relationship with him. but I was doing it through this mode where, okay, the worship band, the rock band would come up and kind of get us all fired up
Yeah.
for a half hour. And it might work. Maybe they sang a song I liked and I'd get really into it that Sunday.
Right.
Maybe the worship leader that Sunday wasn't my cup of tea and I didn't really care for it. And so emotionally, I was still at a distance. And then the pastor would get up and he'd talk. In my tradition, it would have been about a 45-minute sermon, very intellectual. Everyone would take notes. They'd have their Bible out. I'm not saying that's bad, but what I am saying is that it was intellectual. So the kids had to be taken out because the kids weren't capable of that sort of intellectual focus. So they'd go off to kids' church and the adults would have basically a lecture. Sometimes the lecture was good and I got something really, really thoughtful that promoted some devotion in me, and I thought about it for a while. Sometimes the lecture was really bad, to be honest. And on certain Sundays, I'd go home and I'd think, why did I go? Because I didn't get the intellectual need met, and I didn't get the emotional need met. So I wasted my Sunday. And after enough of having those experiences, I started to understand there was something missing. There was some vital grace, some deep-rooted beauty that was missing from the experience. And I was spiritually starving until I could find it. And I found it in the Mass because there was something deeply authentic about it. And it's this grace that's pouring from the cross, from this sacrifice of our Lord. And it has very little to do with the value, the perceived value of the people who are there, right? Whether I like the priest that morning or I don't like him. And I was thinking about it for myself as maybe a future pastor. And I was thinking of all the pressure that was putting on me. And I thought, I can't do that. I can't make the Sunday worship experience for people every Sunday. I'm not that talented. I'm not that holy. And there's something off here if it's a human creation. And so when I really started to meditate on that, I realized that the poetics, this language of creativity and what it is to be made by God, what is it that makes us? It's the holy sacrifice of the Mass. That's where we are reborn spiritually. That's where we are recreated in the image of Christ. And it has nothing to do with relevance. In fact, I think the more relevant, the less interested in it that I personally am. Yeah. And that's actually been a lot of my experience as a Catholic priest as well, which is that when I throw people into the deep end, liturgically speaking, and we just go for it, and we use incense and we chant and we use some Latin and we do all of these ancient things that the church has already just given to us, that appeals to people on a very deep level, and that attracts people into the church, and it reconnects them with the source of their being. And so they find it refreshing and peaceful and contemplative. So for me, there's not really an argument that I would toss out there, like, oh, this is why certain music's good and certain music's bad, or here's my theory of this. But it's the poetics of the Mass is meant to be lived and to be experienced. And so you can only know it as you're living it. So for people who are skeptical, I say, well, just go try a traditional Latin Mass, or go try a Byzantine Catholic Mass, or try a Novus Ordo that you know is very reverent and known for its beauty, and sit with it and see if it affects you and how it affects you, or if it challenges you. And then let that develop your love for Christ, because that's the goal. It's a lived reality, which is the love of Christ. It's not who knows the most about the liturgy, or who has the good music and who has the bad music, or whatever. But it's this lived experience of Christ with his church.
Father Michael Rennier is our guest, and you are welcome to call with your questions. We're talking about the beauty of the Mass. 888 888-318-7884 is the number. I'll just remind you again of the name of Father's book, The Forgotten Language, How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. 888-318-7884. Right back with more after this.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features daily Mass, prayers, articles, and meditations in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church. On the web at magnificat.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
You know, we talk story with each of our very unique guests for the whole hour, so that you can go deep with us as you yourself pursue your own story of heroic virtue and as you pursue intimacy with God.
The Bear Wozniak Adventure, Saturday night, 6 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. The number 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We're talking about the beauty of the Mass with Father Michael. And yes, you see that? I didn't even say his last name because I got scared. I get scared of my pronunciation. Rennier.
You got it.
Okay, I got it. But I'm still scared to say it because I'm scared I'm going to say it wrong. Because this is what I do. You know, I'll say, I'm going to say the correct title of this book that someone has out. And then while I'm saying it, I'll correct myself and go, no, it's this. But then I mess it up. So that's what I'm going to do with your name is I'm going to say, I don't know, something. I don't know. I shouldn't put the wrong thing in my head. But anyways, 888-318-7884 if you want to talk about the beauty of the Mass. A lot of us don't have very much control over the Mass in our parish. I can certainly go to my pastor. I have a lovely pastor. I'm sure he would listen to me if I said something. Not all pastors are of that nature and will listen to you. But I must say that there are contributions that my fellow parishioners can make in the way that they pray the Mass. And I wonder if you would say a word about that, about praying the Mass as the person in the pews, and so bringing beauty just where you're sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it really starts with active participation, right? Which we don't quite understand the phrase, and so we think active participation. And you think, oh, I need to do something.
Right. Yeah.
I need to be doing something up in the sanctuary or have some sort of task or job. And it's great, you know, that the volunteers make the world go round. So if you do it, thank you. But that's not really what active participation is. Active participation, which anybody can do, regardless of, you know, who's sitting next to you, or you don't have to be the priest, right? Is to recollect yourself. Try to open yourself to the beauty of the Mass by just doing a few simple things. So one is pay attention, right? So if you don't have a toddler crawling all over you or something, I know there's extenuating circumstances for some parents and things, but try to pay attention to the little details. So I'm a chaplain at one of the Chesterton academies. We have a Chesterton Academy here in St. Louis. And if there's one thing these high schoolers do is they watch me like a hawk. So at the Mass, they are sitting there and they are paying attention because they know I'm detail oriented. And they then will ask me millions of questions, and it might be about the smallest seeming thing. They might ask me, why does the server kiss the cruet before he puts it back on the table? Father, why do you hold your fingers together, your thumb and your pointer finger together after you've consecrated the host and you don't take them apart for a while? Why do they put this candle here or whatever? And they ask me all these little detail-oriented questions because they're watching. And attention's a form of love. So the more attention we pay, the more that our love for the Mass will grow, especially if you're able to ask a question then and understand, oh, that detail has great significance. It has a lot of meaning to it. The Mass isn't just an arbitrary set of actions, but there's something very deep and abiding about the way that the Church has celebrated the Mass for 2,000 years. And if we're able to pay attention and stop thinking about, well, what is it I need to be doing? Or what is it that I need to be getting out of this? And you just simply sit there and you rest with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I think at any Mass, whether you like the music or not, or who the priest is, or you can get a glimpse into the heart of that Mass simply by paying attention, slowing down. Just slow yourself down, calm down, right? Our minds are racing. We're coming in the door and we're thinking about the work we have to do later in the afternoon, or the argument that we had with someone and we have to resolve later that afternoon, or just we're thinking about all these things. Try to put yourself into a sacred space, a separate space, and think, I'm spending this time with Jesus, and it's going to take maybe 45 minutes. It might take an hour and a half. It doesn't matter. I'm here for it. I thought that was a really interesting article that Cardinal Dolan wrote recently. He said, well, maybe the Mass is too long. And everyone was saying, oh, how's he saying it's too long? But then you read it, and what he says is, well, the priest talks a lot about stuff that really isn't that important, right? So he kind of tells you this little extra thing or that extra thing, and then we do this silly thing, and we're wasting a lot of time, and it's very egocentric. And his point is correct. The Mass, in that sense, is too long. It's too busy. It's too frantic. So get rid of all that stuff, right? But then on the other hand, the Mass is not long enough. Because once you're resting and you've slowed down and you're simply in this different sort of a time, you're resting in God's time, it seems like it goes by so quickly. And that's just from slowing down. There's almost this paradoxical relationship whereby if we pay attention and slow down, we become ever more engrossed in it. It doesn't become boring. It becomes more exciting. So I think that's a couple things that we can do. Bringing our love to the Mass, particularly as a sacrifice, is very valuable as well. This idea that we're joining our sacrifice to that of our Lord. So when you go to Mass, bring with you a prayer for a loved one that you want to pray for that person during the Mass, and then visualize yourself putting that prayer onto the altar and being lifted up to God the Father as a pleasing sacrifice because it's been united to the sacrifice of Christ. And now we're back into the poetics of it. So you think, oh, I'm just one person. I'm very flawed. I don't understand everything about the Mass. I'm a bad Catholic. I sinned all week and I haven't been able to get to confession yet. I don't deserve to be here. God's not listening to me. This is unimportant. But think about what a poem does. So a poet might write a poem about a rose, a red rose, how beautiful the red rose is. And we know he probably is looking at a red rose that is inspiring him, but that's not what the poem's about. The poem's about maybe the woman that he loves, who is like that red rose. And it becomes very obvious he's describing a universal concept of love through a particular thing. And that's what the Mass does. It takes a particular thing, the bread, the wine, you and me, with our unique personalities and our victories and our defeats and, the totality of who we are with these individual lives. And then Christ is knitting us together into the universal body of Christ. So our little sacrifices become a great sacrifice, and our small loves become a great love. And that is the secret of the Mass. And that's what gets me so fired up and energetic about how beautiful it is.
It's so interesting, though, that if I follow what you're describing, for one thing, I'm not trying to reach an emotional state. There's nothing that I can do emotionally that is going to be grateful enough or excited enough about Jesus. So I'm not trying to reach an emotional state. I'm trying to be attentive to what's happening so that I can love the one who is there causing all of this to happen. But it seems to me the other side of that is if I really undertake what you just described in slowing down and being attentive, I no longer want what I wanted before. I first of all, I want the priest to be less of a showman, not more of a showman. I'm not looking for a showman. That's not helping me if I'm trying to attend to the Mass. And I want less jingly jangly music. I want something that's going to help center me and quiet me.
Right. Exactly. And so one of the examples I use in my book is Dante. So Dante, on his journey, he starts at the very beginning. He says, I loved this woman in the wrong way, and my desire was malformed. And through his journey, his desire is completely changed. And by the end, he loves God alone.
Right. The Mass
and
is
that's what's happening in the Mass.
Yeah, the Mass is a journey towards a properly ordered love of God. We'll get to that when we come back on the other side, and get the calls. I promise we'll get the calls right after this. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to get right to the core of Christ's saving message? Want a roadmap for living the life Christ calls you to? It's time to look again at the Beatitudes. In his new book, Heart of the Gospel, How the Beatitudes Show Us God's Plan for Happiness, Father Sebastian Walsh demonstrates compellingly how these 8 declarations make up the foundation, the essence, and the final goal of Jesus' teaching. Heart of the Gospel illuminates the scriptural passages from which we get the Beatitudes, explains the significance of their wording, their order, and their timing in Jesus' ministry. And it draws out edifying parallels and connections with salvation history and the lives of the saints. Most importantly, Father Walsh offers wise counsel from his own work as a priest and teacher to help you live the Beatitudes in your own life. Order your copy of Heart of the Gospel today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. We bring you the truth of the Catholic faith on Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
All right, I monopolized Father Michael Rennier? I'm going to go with Rennier this time. I have a monopolized Father Michael Rennier, so I'm going to let callers ask questions. We're talking about the beauty of the Mass. What I will do is say the title of his book again, The Forgotten Language, How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. Marty is in Irving, Texas. Marty, we're awful glad you're here. I'm sorry that I made you wait, but go ahead with your question for Father.
Oh, no, that's fine. I probably had more time to think about it because I've been listening and I've been driving, and so I had to go back and forth with the screener, and so I neither heard the show from the absolute beginning nor did I get to hear all of it because I was going back and forth with the screener and had to, miss bits. But what I did come away with is that the guest that you have, Father Rennier, is primarily celebrates the Mass in Latin. I don't have a lot of experience with the Mass in Latin, despite being a cradle Catholic, and so is what he's presenting about the beauty and all of that based on the Latin Mass alone?
Ah, okay, Father.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So the short answer, Marty, is no. So I do, you're a very keen listener, so I do celebrate the Mass both the traditional Latin Mass, but I also celebrate very regularly the new Mass. And when I talk about the beauty of the Mass, I'm referring to all of the above, is essentially what I'm referring to. The church that I referenced earlier, I talked about a church I went to in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Catholic, the cathedral there. That would not have been a traditional Latin Mass, the very first Mass that I went to before I was Catholic, and I was stunned by how beautiful it was. So the elements of beauty in the Mass, to me, are very obviously present in both forms. And also, I don't want to sell anyone else short. There's also other forms of worship in the Catholic Church, the Byzantine rite, these Eastern rites that are a little more esoteric, but they're fully Catholic. So I think that the common elements of it are there in all of the ways the Catholic Church prays, is if we will let them be there, which is the reverence and the beauty and allowing God space to create a contemplative space so that we can join in the holy sacrifice of the Mass.
Marty, what do you think?
Well, the parish he referenced is the parish that my parents belonged to for 20-something years, yes. I didn't live there then. I was already, off to college and everything else. So I went occasionally with them, but very often when I was home from college, we would go to the closest Mass or, whichever. We didn't necessarily go to their own parish all the time. And the contemplative part, I guess maybe I have a hard time with because I also have ADD.
Yeah.
And I heard Father say something about, that I guess when he was a Protestant, he thought more of sermons as lectures and that there'd actually be people taking notes. I've actually, in my old age now, find myself during the sermon pulling out a pen and paper and actually taking notes because it helps me remember what was talked about. And if I don't write anything down, it's gone. So,
Father, what do you think about that?
Or maybe if Marty doesn't have any notes from my homily, I didn't say anything worth recording. Right? It's a bad sign. No, I think that's a beautiful thing. However it is that you're able to organize your attention during the Mass, I think is great.
It can be very painful for people with ADD to attend for all that time. But I actually think Marty's call is very relevant because that's getting to be the case with everybody because of our phones and where our mind is not trained to be still.
True. Yeah. So in a way, this is exactly the medicine that we need. I actually have had some families with children who have attention issues tell me that they really have appreciated my masses. I say my mass very lightly, but attending masses where I'm, because I'm very calm and I'm kind of quiet when I speak. I'm not really a great showman. I'm introverted. But some of these children really like that because they're not being overstimulated.
Oh, how interesting.
Right. And so they have actually found it a little bit easier to focus when the Mass is a little bit more calm.
Marty, I'm just going to say thank you and leave it there because every single line is full. Our guest is Father Michael Rennier, and we're talking about the beauty of the Mass. Grant is in McHenry, Illinois, listening on WSFI. Glad you're here, Grant. Go ahead with your question. Did I go to the wrong line? Hey, Grant. No, I'm on the right line, even though I have my Lord of the Buttons plaque here. That was the correct line. We're going to come back to you, Grant, after when your alarm goes off. But let's go to Bobby in Rome, Georgia, watching on YouTube. Hi, Bobby. Go ahead with your question.
Good evening, guys. Thanks, Father, for taking my question. So in the Mass, in the beginning of the penitential rite, when the priest says, "May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life," I make the sign of the cross because it's something I've done since I was a child. I see my parents do it. I don't see everybody doing it, though, so am I doing something wrong?
I wouldn't say you're doing something wrong. So it's not technically an absolution of sins, so that's probably why you're not seeing people make the sign of the cross at that spot. So sometimes people think, well, that is the absolution of my sins. I don't have to go to confession. And that would be incorrect. So you do have to go to confession, even if you say that act of contrition with everyone else at the beginning of the Mass. Now, if it has been your habit to make that sign of the cross, my personal view as a priest is you pray how you want to pray in the pews, as long as it's not particularly disruptive, right? There's no real rules for how you have to do certain things or hold your hands. I think it's helpful. And one of the things I really appreciated when I first started going to the Mass as a layperson was that everyone did pray together, and physically everybody, there was a common understanding of how physically people would pray. So everyone would kneel at the same time. Everyone would stand at the same time, say the Lord's Prayer together at the same time. So for me, I loved that because it freed me up to pray without being self-conscious. Well, should I do this now or should I not do this now? So I wouldn't get too hung up on questions of, well, I'm making the sign of cross and no one else is. And I wouldn't do anything that's ostentatious or makes you stand out. But if you want to quietly do it, I don't see really much of an issue with that.
Okay.
There's a really beautiful way in which our physical bodies help us pray. So I would encourage people to keep that connection.
Okay, Bobby?
Okay. And why do you keep your thumb and forefinger touching after the consecration?
He raised that issue, but he never resolved it, did he, Bobby? Why do you do that, Father?
I got called on that one. Yeah, so a traditional habit, and you'll see some priests here and there doing it. So after the Eucharistic host is consecrated, there might be particles on the priest's fingers that have touched that host. And so the tradition is that from that moment, unless he's actively picking up the host, he keeps his fingers pressed together so any particles that might be on the tips of his fingers won't fall off and get lost on the altar top or even on the floor. And then after the distribution of communion, the altar server pours a little bit of wine and water right over those fingers. And then after that, you'll see the priest's fingers open back up again.
Bobby, thank you very much for the call. There's 2 lines open now if you have a question about the Mass, about the beauty of the Mass. As we said at the beginning, we are, as Catholics in the United States, and I know that I've talked to Catholics around the world who have said that they've been kind of inspired by this effort in the United States at Eucharistic revival. We're praying for a revival of devotion to Christ in the Eucharist, a revival of intimacy with Christ in the Eucharist, which is, after all, exactly what he wants with us. And the beauty of the Mass is a big part of that, because the place that we experience the Eucharistic Christ is almost always, not always, but almost always the Mass. And so if you have questions about the beautiful celebration of the Mass, about the beauty that's intrinsic in the Mass, or about how to bring beauty to the Mass, 888-318-7884. Katie's in Oklahoma listening to EWTN on Channel 130 Sirius XM satellite radio. Katie, you're welcome here. Go ahead with your question for Father.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
We're very happy to, Katie.
All right. I had coworkers who they do behavior therapy, and so one of their kiddos, they go to Mass with them, and they were talking about there's a lot of sitting and standing and kneeling. So I was wondering why, as Catholics, we do all that stuff, and how it plays into living the Mass.
Okay. I know why we do the sitting, because it's comfortable, but I'll let Father do the other 2.
You get to sit during Mass?
Oh, that's right. You don't sit very much, do you, Father?
You guys are lucky.
So sitting, standing, kneeling, why are we changing postures like this in Mass?
Well, essentially because we as human beings, we're not just spirits that are praying with our spirit, but we're enfleshed. We're shaped. We're souls that have physical shape. And so what we do with our bodies matters. And I would say it's probably a very common experience that it feels more prayerful for people if you kneel and pray than if you're sitting and praying. And the Catholic Mass is very physical, which I think is great, because that's really how we learn. We learn through our senses. We learn through what we see and touch and taste and smell. And so all of these sources of input are catechizing us without even the priest having to tell us what's happening. And I think that when we're standing and kneeling and making the sign of the cross and doing these physical actions, we're learning something about ourselves and about prayer and about how Jesus Christ is praying in us and with us, right? So what does it mean to make a sign of the cross over yourself? You're saying something very powerful about yourself. It's a very powerful prayer without even using any words. You're saying, I am saved by the blood of the cross, and my identity is buried with Christ. So I remember the first time, I again, going back to that experience at Mass, and I had never done that before. I had never made a sign of the cross, because Protestants don't do that. And so I sort of furtively looked out of the corner of my eye, and I was watching everyone else do it, and I kind of did it. And I felt almost transgressive, but it was very liberating. I thought, oh, I'm doing what Christians do. And this is the first time, and I'm being incorporated into this physical body of Christ. And these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. It's hard to explain what I felt. I just remember it was very powerful. And it wasn't something that I, at that point, was taking for granted. And it's something I hope I don't take for granted today. I know it can become rote, or we can do it thoughtlessly. And that's where we go back again to, okay, pay attention and slow down. I'm about to make the sign of the cross. Why? What do these physical things mean? I'm about to kneel with everyone else in the church in adoration before our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. Right? That's a witness that I believe that this is the truth, that this is the real presence. This is Jesus Christ our Lord being held in the hands of the priest at the altar, and I am worshiping him. So I think these actions, they speak volumes, and it's great if we understand it and we're fully participating in it, we're fully engaged in what we're doing, but there's even meaning to it when we're simply doing it even forgetfully. That's not the goal, but it happens, right? But there's something about the commitment that I think is really, really heartwarming, right? So let's say you've been married for 40 years, and you have this habit where on your way to work, you call your wife, and when you hang up, you say, I love you, I'll see you tonight when I get home from work. Some days you really mean it. On your wedding day, when you told your wife you loved her, you were crying tears. Maybe one day you told her you love her right after you had a disagreement on the phone. You said, all right, we'll figure it out later when I get home. Don't worry about it, I love you, bye. That was still meaningful, right? Because that was a promise. And that was decades of commitment. And when we do these things in the Mass, and we come to them again and again and again and again, and the Mass in many ways is very ritualistic. We're doing the same things week after week or day after day, but they're so meaningful. And every time we come to them, there's more commitment to it. There's more faithfulness to it. And we ourselves might look back and say, I've changed. I'm not the person I was 10 years ago. And what was it that changed? It can't be me, because I'm not that good, right? I'm not that self-reflective. The Mass changed me.
Katie, what do you think of that answer?
It's very good. I appreciate it.
Oh, Katie,
you're very welcome.
I'm so glad that you asked the question to occasion that answer. Thank you very, very much for the call. Man, lines continue full. I'm so happy that people want to talk about the Mass and want to talk about the beauty of the Mass. We'll take a very quick break and come right back and continue with that conversation with Father Michael Rennier.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
He was a pope, a saint, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
Pope St. Gregory I the Great is one of only 4 popes honored as the Great. Among his many achievements was sending missionaries across Northern Europe, especially St. Augustine of Canterbury, who brought Christ to the people of England. In a pun, Pope Gregory called the English people angels. He died in 604.
To find out more, visit EWTN.com and click on Catholicism.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm CAlive, your host. Our guest, Father Michael Rennier, has a book that I will recommend to you, The Forgotten Language, How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. It's from Sophia Institute Press. And that occasions the conversation that we have today about beauty in the Mass. There's all kinds of struggles over what the Mass should be, how the Mass should be celebrated. And sometimes those struggles maybe make us less good than we should be when we're celebrating the Mass, maybe a little more ideological or combative with one another rather than open to one another and open to the love of the Lord. But I think we all know we could do it better. We just need to know what it means to do the Mass better, and that's some of what we're talking about today. Let's go to Bill in Mainville, Ohio, listening on 910 a.m. Bill, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Father.
Thank you very much for taking my call, Father. And this is directly related to the Eucharistic renewal and the celebration of the Mass. I'm a resident in the state of Tennessee, but I'm visiting my son here in Ohio. And when I come up here to visit him, I always attend Catholic Mass at the local parish, St. Margaret of York. One of the things that's been bothering me for the past 5 years when I go to Mass there is that the previous pastor had a habit of not ringing the bells at the consecration of the Mass. Now, having been trained reverently by a very passionate Sister of Mercy when I was in grammar school a long time ago, she emphasized to us how critical the consecration of the host and the wine was, and how we as altar boys had to make sure that our ringing of the bells was done with reverence and correctly. And so to come to a church up here in Ohio and go to a Mass and not have the bells rung at consecration, I was disappointed. So I approached the deacon. The first time it happened, I approached one of the deacons after Mass, and he said, well, it's optional. And I said, optional? I've never heard that it's optional. And as I was walking out of Mass, the pastor, who had been tipped off by the deacon, said, oh, you're the guy that was asking about the ringing of the bells. I said, yeah, Father, that's me. He says, well, I have bells. They're over there in my storage closet. And I said, yeah, well, the problem is you don't know how to ring them. And so anyway, I thought to myself, well, here's a guy who hasn't been trained properly. And so now a couple of years have passed, and there's a new pastor, and I've come back to visit my son again, and I go over to Mass at St. Margaret of York, and once again, they don't ring the bells.
Father, let's get I do think this is indicative of what it is to be Catholic today. You never know what you get when you walk into a parish you haven't been in before.
Yeah, it's always it's a wild card, right? I think what's really interesting there, though, is here we have something being described. You're hearing something, the bells, and when they're gone, you notice it, and it doesn't sound like it should be all that big of a deal. It's optional, right? But when they're not there, something fundamentally feels off. And I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that the Mass is so sensory and it's all encompassing. And even something like a bell, you might think it's whatever, like they ring the bells or they don't. Well, even if you were to ask, well, what is the Catholic theology of bells? I could go back, research, and come back on your show next week and talk to you for an hour about bells,
right,
because they're that interesting and they're that meaningful. So everything is symbolic. And so when we start to sort of pick away at this tapestry of beauty, we don't always quite know what we're unraveling. until it's too late, right? So
exactly, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we took it away, or it's missing, and we don't even know what it is we took away. But the thing is, the many Catholics do have that experience, and they, even if Father doesn't miss it, they will miss it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's appropriate for the laity in a respectful manner to let the priest know, hey, Father, I love the bells.
I just bring my own bells to church, Father. Is that wrong that I just bring my own bells?
Exactly. If you get the
I
bells
sit in the
out,
back and I
then
just.
win them.
Michael, thank you very much for the call. We're getting close to the end, so onward we go. Greg's in Texas. Greg, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Father.
Yes, Father. With respect to the Latin Mass, it's my understanding I've only been once or twice, but the priest back to the congregation, if I recall correctly. Is that because the tabernacle is open, or is there another reason?
Right. It's a great question. So it all has to do with who the Mass is being offered for. There's a misconception that we think the Mass is for us. That's how we started this whole conversation almost an hour ago. What I need. So we think that the role of the priest is he's supposed to look deeply into my eyes in the pews, and he's supposed to impart some wisdom or good feeling to me, because the Mass is for me. But the holy sacrifice of the Mass is for God the Father. It's the sacrifice of the Son, Jesus Christ, being offered to God the Father. And then we, as the body of Christ, are joining in that sacrifice, and we're all facing God together. So when people tell me, the priest might have his back to the people, I say, well, that's fine. I'm not going to get mad at you for saying that phrase, but it's a little more helpful to say the priest is facing God the Father with you. And so that's the logic to it. And it's actually very simple. So when the priest is talking to God the Father, he's facing God the Father. And when he talks to the priest, the people, he turns around and talks to the people. It's that easy.
Okay, Greg?
Okay.
Does it make sense?
It makes sense. What about when you leave perpetual adoration? Should you leave with
like what? I know.
Backwards?
Yeah, a lot of people have developed this thing now where they walk backwards out of adoration if they have to leave adoration.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that. That might be a bit much. I don't know. I would hate if people fall over backwards and crack their head against a pew because they're walking backwards.
Right. But I
understand the intention, though.
Yeah, I think the right, as you said, Father, there's an intention there, which is to show respect to the King of Kings, who's in whose presence we are at that time. But it is a liturgical innovation in search of that respect. I think I can get Michael on. Let's try Michael. Michael in Los Angeles. If you can be quick, we could probably get you an answer.
Yes, thank you. What's the difference between the Latin Mass, the New Order Mass, and the Byzantine Mass?
All right,
Thank you.
Hang on after. I'm going to give you a book because that was quick.
Yeah. Do you have a book for him, for real?
I'm going to give him a book, yeah.
Okay, because there's no way I can answer that question. There's a lot of little details. The commonality is they're all Catholic.
Okay,
But in practice, they're very diverse, and I think of them not as competitors, but it's like they're very harmonious, and the diversity is healthy for us in a good way.
Michael, we're going to have to leave it there and offer you a book. If you want to just hang on for a minute, we'll get you a book. Our guest has been Father Michael Rennier, and you can get his book. It's from Sophia Institute Press. It's called The Forgotten Language: How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. Father, thank you so much for a wonderful hour. I wonder if we and our listeners could have your blessing, please.
Sure. Do you mind if I revert to Latin?
You may revert.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filios, et Spiritus Sanctus.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father. It was a great pleasure. Please say hello to our very good friend, Father Eugene Morris, who's there in St. Louis as well.
I sure will. Thanks.
That does it for us. We'll be back. We'll do it again tomorrow right here, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.